Hi everyone, you may be aware of the fact that there's this common identification of King Mark of Cornwall from the legends of Tristan and Isolde as the historical Count Conomor of Brittany, a famous or rather infamous tyrant of that land in the 6th century. One of the reasons for this is that in Cornwall there is a stone monument from the 6th century which appears to say Drustanus, son of Conomorus. So that appears to show that Conomorus, or Conomor, Count Conomor of Brittany, had a son called Drustanus, which is another name for Tristan, another form of the name Tristan. So that lends significant support to the idea that Count Conomor was the historical figure behind the legends of King Mark of Cornwall, even though King Mark of Cornwall wasn't actually said to be the father of Tristan in most of the legends. He was his uncle, although he still acted as a father figure because Tristan's father is said to have died when Tristan was young. But in any case, this stone is often used to support the identification of Count Conomor with King Mark of Cornwall. And it's an identification that I think is extremely likely, especially because in the 9th century life of St. Paul Aurelian, or life of St. Paul of Leon, Mark of Cornwall is specifically described as also being known as Conomorus. So, as far as I'm concerned, that settles the case. However, a lot of modern academic sources say that there's no real evidence for this identification, and in particularly recent literature on the topic, there's a claim that this stone monument doesn't actually refer to Drustanus at all. If this is the case, then that would severely weaken the identification of Mark with Conomorus. So according to the claim, modern 3D scanning has shown that this monument doesn't actually start with the letter D. Well, the idea is that it's a D which is reversed, which isn't something that's particularly uncommon in early medieval monuments, early medieval inscriptions. So that's not particularly strange, the idea of this D being inverted. But what's more significant is that this 3D scan, which occurred in 2014, shows apparently that the curve and the line are actually separated. And so it's not one letter, but it's actually a C followed by an L. That's the idea, that this name actually isn't Drustanus at all, but it's a name beginning with CL, or possibly CI. In any case, it's got nothing to do with the name Drustanus. So if that's the case, that would weaken the connection between Conomorus and Tristan, and therefore weaken the case for Conomorus being Mark of Cornwall. However, when we actually look at the paper which is the origin of this claim, do we actually find that the evidence supports this claim? Well, let's have a look, because it's visual. So let's have a look at this paper. Let's have a look at the part where it claims that the 3D scan shows that this letter isn't a D, but it's actually two different letters. Now, as we can see in the paper, the claim is, in figure 3A, AO shading was used to examine remains on the area where the archaic form of Tristan is meant to exist. This helped demonstrate clearly that the backwards curve and the line are separate. They represent a C and an I, not a backwards uncial style D. So let's have a look at figure 3A and let's see what it actually shows. When we have a look at the image, which is the image included in the paper itself, this is figure 3A, we can see that the supposed C and I are not, in fact, separated. The image that they have provided themselves actually shows that they are connected. It's one letter. Clearly this is, in fact, a D. Now, I'm not going to sit here and accuse these people of academic dishonesty or say that they were lying or anything like that. I have no idea why they made the claim that they did. My point, merely, is simply that in this scan, you and I can see with our own eyes that in this very image that the researchers themselves have provided, that there are not two distinct letters here. It's one letter. It's not a C and an I, it's one letter. Evidently a backwards D. So the name really should be Drustanus. This 3D scan is useful. It helps to confirm the popular modern academic reading of Drustanus, because to be clear, that is the popular modern academic reading. Most academics who have looked at this in recent decades have argued that Drustanus, or some variation of Drustanus, is the right reading. So this isn't some fringe theory. If this 3D scan really showed that these were two different letters, a C and an I, this would be going against the grain of what most academics were arguing. So this 3D scan is useful. It helps to confirm this popular academic reading. It helps to confirm that Conomor really was associated with someone called Drustanus, therefore making it more likely that he really should be identified as the historical figure behind the legends of King Mark of Cornwall. Here's another question for you. Does the Greek legend of the griffin really come from sightings of fossils of the Protoceratops, or is this just a modern myth? Well, if you'd like to know the answer, come back next time.